Hello, my name is Randy Michael. I'm here today to talk about wildland recreation and the impacts human beings have on our wild spaces when we enjoy the outdoors. Human beings can have major impact on wildlands when we choose to enjoy our outdoor spaces. Many of them are negative, many of them are positive, and we'll go over all of them today. In today's society, human beings must intervene often in our wild spaces in order to protect those spaces and make sure they can be enjoyed for future generations. Many people who enjoy wildland recreation intentionally or unintentionally damage the wildlands as they're enjoying the outdoor spaces. There are several ways that we can damage wildland areas, including creating unintentional fires, sometimes intentional ones unfortunately, along with consumptive uses such as hunting and fishing, non-consumptive uses such as hiking, birding, boating. All of these can have negative impacts on the wild spaces. There are humans who want to preserve these spaces, and excellent managers will go out of their way to make sure the wild spaces remain as wild as possible while allowing humans to be able to enjoy the spaces. Unfortunately, most human beings tend to enjoy wild spaces at a distance. They might get in a car, go drive around, look at the pretty sights that, oh, aren't those trees in the forest pretty? Look at those wildflowers. Let's stop the car for a moment, get out, and say, oh, let's take a picture or two. Some of them won't even bother to get out of the car. Let's just drive through the area and we'll take some pictures, and that'll be the end of it. You just see pictures that people have taken out of their cars because they can't be bothered to actually walk into a wild space and enjoy what's around them. People might go along, and the biggest extent that they see close to actually getting into wild spaces is a city park. Now, human activity affects our wild spaces both directly and indirectly. Directly, a lot of the activities are consumptive uses, such as hunting and fishing. These consumptive uses can affect the wild populations of animals. It can cause a decline in the overall species count if the reproduction rate isn't adequate to cover the hunting losses. It might affect the overall reproduction because there is a change in the ratio of the sexes between the male and the female animals. And it might drive animals away from the best habitat that they have available for their food, and shelter, and reproduction. The same can happen with fishermen when they go fishing. The ratio of male to female fish changes. The best breeding grounds might be completely depleted of breeding stock of fishes. The consumptive uses can be a real issue for our wildland recreation spaces when human beings enter into them. There can be controlled hunting and fishing as long as the people follow the rules and the limits on their permits, and at times it is even necessary so overpopulation doesn't exist in certain wild spaces. It's when we get to people who are indiscriminate, won't follow the permits and the limit laws, that we have major issues with consumptive recreation. Non-consumptive users of wildland recreation spaces, such as birders, hikers, mountain bikers, snowmobilers, and numerous other types of outdoor recreation enthusiasts, can affect the lands indirectly. They might affect the lands indirectly by people such as birders wanting to get a better look at their quarry, so they try to get a little closer and a little closer and a little closer until they drive the birds away. The birds may return, they may not. In the worst case scenario, they will never return, and it will interrupt breeding cycles if the birds were planning on breeding in a given area. And birders inadvertently will affect vegetation as they go off the trail to try to get a better look or picture of whatever bird they're seeking. And hikers can affect wildlife in much the same way. When they decide to hike off of established trails, make their own trails, they'll damage vegetation, drive wildlife away, and make it difficult for others who want to enjoy our wildlands to actually see wild animals in our open spaces. Now, the birders that I talked about, they also can directly affect vegetation by tromping on it to the point where sometimes it will kill vegetation. They might transport seeds of one species of plant into another area that they go birding and inadvertently drop seeds there, bringing an invasive species of plant into a given wild space. And that makes it difficult for the native plants to exist, as some invasive species can be much stronger and more vigorous and essentially drive out the native plant life from the given area. Now, there are a number of other ways that human beings will affect wild spaces. One we've already discussed in hunting and fishing is the harvesting of animals. The other major factor is pollution. Pollution can be pollution in the air that affects both animal and plant life. It can be pollution in the form of refuse that human beings leave on the ground, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It can be pollution from runoff from farms, pesticides, fertilizers, and things of that nature that get into our wild spaces, which can affect the health and reproduction of numerous species of both plants and animals. Now, the pollution also brings up the issue of global warming. And as the Earth is getting warmer, has been irrefutably discovered, our oceans are slowly rising. Lush, moist tropical areas are starting to become more arid, going into a semi-arid state. When that happens in our wildlands, the wildlife starts to look for other places that they can go and be able to live and reproduce, which is their main job in life. And when they go to these other places, their forage, their shelter is probably not going to be as good as it was in the area that they're being displaced from due to global warming and the essential deforestation of the areas in which they might have lived. Or in some cases where we have wild swings in the climate and might even be areas that are extremely cold compared to the norm for that given wild space. And as the animals are driven out, new animals better suited to those spaces will come in and take over in those spaces. Now, they will survive well enough in those spaces until that becomes untenable for them to live in. Now, another major factor that affects wildland recreation is the human encroachment of our cities, towns, suburbs, businesses to the edge of wildland recreation areas. When human beings continue to push their homes out further and further away from city centers and to the edges of wildland areas, it directly affects the wildlife and directly affects the people who are moving into those areas that were formerly wild. The wildlife in these areas are squeezed into smaller and smaller spaces, and as they get squeezed into these smaller spaces, they start looking at other items for potential prey for the predators, and this can include pets in backyards of people who live right up to the edge of the wildland area. The wild animal is just trying to get a meal, but it learns there are easy targets in the yards of people right next door to them. So the pets become an easy prey item for these animals, and they get used to be able to find an easy meal in someone's yard. And when that happens, the people who live in these homes get angry, consider the animals to be problems, and want them either exterminated or moved away from their sanitized life in their home with their lush backyards. Also, when the people start moving into those yards, those homes, they plant plants which are usually not native to the area, and you get seeds blown on wind, seeds that might be eaten by birds and deposited elsewhere in the wildland areas. And when this happens, we start having the invasive plant species problem again. So human beings have major impacts on wildland areas at all times. Sometimes they are direct and easily observable, such as with hunting and fishing, harvesting of animals. Other times they're much more indirect, such as the seeds blowing from a non-native plant in a yard on the wind into the wild areas. As we go on in our lives and we want to go out and enjoy our wild areas, we have to consider when we go out to these areas what kind of impacts we as people are having on them. There is a famous saying about leave no trace, or sometimes leave nothing but footprints when you enjoy wild areas. And those are laudable goals. We always want to do that. And if possible, if you're out in a wildland area, you happen to see a piece of trash that you can safely pick up and remove from the area, it's worthwhile to do so, because the pollution we talked about earlier, including refuse on the ground, can very much be a danger to animals in the area. Some animals might eat the refuse and it can damage them or even kill them. It can create pollution effects for the plants that are there, depending on what was in the particular item of trash. And we all need to do our part to help keep the wildland areas clean. Now, the wildland areas aren't confined to just land areas. Our wild waters also have issues with human impacts. The harvesting of fish being one of the main ones, but there are many others, an example of which would be the West Indian manatee, or sometimes called the Florida manatee. These slow-moving marine mammals like to loiter near the surface of the water to keep themselves warm and be able to take breaths occasionally above the surface of the water. And because they move slowly and they're very near the surface, boaters who indiscriminately speed through manatee areas in boats that have propellers will often scar the backs of the manatees with the propellers, or even kill the manatees because they go through at such a high rate of speed and the propeller is spinning so quickly. Now, the manatees and some other marine mammals can certainly be injured and killed this way. And there are also issues with land-based recreation of vehicles, such as mountain bikes and snowmobiles, where small mammals and even some larger ones occasionally, like deer, will get hit by human vehicles as people are enjoying their particular form of recreation. Now, we need to make sure that we keep as many wild spaces available as we can for everyone. There is a thought that once humans enter a wild space, is the space still wild? It's a difficult question to answer, and I believe that the space does remain wild because the human presence eventually does leave the area. Hikers may hike for a few hours or even a whole day, but they're typically not going to find an encampment and make that their home for the rest of their lives. The same goes for mountain bikers, birders, snowmobilers, any campers, anyone else who wants to be out in our wild spaces enjoying them. Now, as we go on, we have to promote the use of our wild spaces, and it seems counterintuitive, but it's important to promote these spaces and get more people enjoying them because we will get more people who are interested in saving these spaces, not allowing human encroachment, development, oil drilling, or any other human activities detrimental to the space that will ultimately destroy it completely. In order to do that, we have to have very strong managers in our wild spaces, be they park rangers, recreation coordinators, outdoor guides, whatever the case may be. Everyone involved needs to be strong, needs to program properly, find the carrying capacity of the wild areas that they are in charge of, and determine if the area needs admission fees to help pay for maintenance of trails, bridges, any bathroom, picnic areas, whatever the case might be in a particular wild space. We as humans have the responsibility of keeping the wild spaces for everyone. If we lose all the wild spaces, we lose a tremendous amount of not just the easily measurable items such as the animals and plants, but the very difficult to quantify enjoyment that humans get out of going out and truly enjoying the wild spaces. Those of us who get out of our vehicles and go far afield in order to enjoy these spaces, we need to make sure we're doing all we can to help the wild spaces and the animal and plant life that lies within. Thank you.